All right, folks. We'll get started again. This is Brian in the room here. And so for our last discussion, this is just going to be a plenary discussion amongst everyone online and in the room. Again, I'm Brian Jackson at Boise State, and I'll be co-chairing this with Cynthia. Cynthia, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. I'm Cynthia Dinwiddie from Southwest Research Institute in San Antonio. I've added some additional thoughts as prompts in the chat for this session.
Excellent. Thank you, Cynthia. I'm gonna copy paste your text block here. Yeah, so now we're moving into the the diplomacy phase. I don't know what we were kind of talking a little bit about, the marketing phase. So we want to think a little bit about who's interested in this, who's the shareholders in these kinds of investigations, and how to share information with these shareholders, papers, invite folks to conferences, additional workshops. Cynthia, you want to say a little bit about what your comment is here?
Yeah, so the idea was when we were at the other meeting that we potentially need to collaborate with other folks to get our measurement instruments onto missions of interest. And so, you know, there's a limited subset of us from the community in the room and online, and perhaps not even everyone who's interested in this topic is here. So who then are these other shareholders who are interested in potentially partnering and being able to get mission concept off the ground? So I just put some thoughts in there. Verena mentioned, and Ed has pretty much proven that modern brines are definitely one of those groups we need to be networking with. And then thinking about modelers, near surface geophysicists, the polar Mars community, and more generally, not just about Mars, but volatile and ice communities.
Yeah, and I like Steve's comment here. JPL and I think a lot of these other big labs that would host a mission have, I think, interest in something that's going to be splashy and exciting for the public. It's not enough to just say we're going to make these measurements. We need to be thinking about, I mean, very, very literally marketing to the public. That it should in no way damage the science, compromise the science, but we need to be thinking about, and I think that's more about thinking about how to cast the problems that we're interested in studying, what kind of language to use, what kind of illustrations to use, those kinds of things. When I think about how to talk about my science to the public, I try to think about how I would explain it to my mom or my 9-year-old. What language would I use? And if I can't explain the science that I'm doing in a way that my 9-year-old will understand, not that she'll care about it, she never cares about anything I'm telling her, but just that she'll understand, then that means to me that I don't understand it myself. And if I don't understand an idea, then I don't think I can make people excited about it. So that's a very helpful mental model for me. Oh yeah, thanks, Serena. And we'll discuss some specific maybe action items kind of tomorrow morning. But yeah, I'd be curious to hear what other folks have to say about these topics. And you've got the mic, okay? Yeah, in the room here.
Hi, this is Jack. I guess I might even start with somewhat negative comment in terms of we have a workshop, but we couldn't even convince a NASA representative to even go on the Zoom meeting. Does that mean we're, you know, does that mean we aren't exciting enough, or what does it mean that we couldn't entice an engineer or a NASA person who has to think about this stuff? What did we do wrong, or how do we address that issue? And that's a posing that question to get some understanding myself on how these things work.
So I'm going to redirect that question to Serena. It's like, did we even invite someone from NASA to come do welcome remarks or anything?
In terms of like thinking about NASA programs and headquarters folk, no, we did not reach out. In terms of engineers, I didn't have a lot of success in it, but we did have someone coming, and then 2 weeks ago, unfortunately, he couldn't. And by that point, then I reached out to a few more, but the people I could reach had other plans for the week. But yes, I agree. We needed more engineering here. Not quite sure if we were quite ready for a NASA headquarters person. I feel like maybe that's the next step, and we should definitely talk about that as well. But at this workshop, I agree, that was a failure in terms of us being able to pull that group in. We needed that expertise in the room, and we needed them listening to the rest of us.
So to follow on that note, maybe we're not ready for Lori Glaze, but what level do you think we're ready for the next time we do this?
I think we're ready now. Yeah, we're ready now.
Yeah, I mean, if we don't start talking to them now, then we're off on a tangent over here, and then it's too late. And then they say, oh, we'll cut the arm off here, and we'll start with this group over here that's been talking to us. You know what I mean? So who is it? Whoever's in charge of maybe SSW.
Well, we've been talking about specific people to recruit. Maybe one of the things is we're here in Boise and not in Pasadena. Maybe if we'd gone to where the people are, it would have been a little easier. Maybe that was part of the problem. I don't know.
Well, no, but I mean headquarters people.
What's that?
Yeah.
It's true. It was a hybrid. They could have attended virtually. That's right. So
Yeah, program managers of whoever would fund these things. So even some Picasso Matisse people, that would be good.
So
Just start
yeah, we
right
could
away.
go to DC or something next time. We found someone to host us in DC.
That'd be good.
So some of the comments in the chat are about visually making concepts that we're trying to propose attractive by getting some artists together to help us visualize, because we are pictures worth 1,000 words, they say. But then Dawn had to say that this is only one of many high priority science topics for Mars, and it may not rise to the echelon of highest priority. I mean, I think for Mars, using the hook of human exploration is probably a pretty essential one, because atmospheric processes are going to play a pretty distinct role for effective human exploration.
So this is Alejandro. I think we need to reach out to the NASA program managers, to people involved in SSW, Matisse, Picasso, MDAP, CDAP, and PSTAR, the ones that all jump to mind. And I understand Don's point, but in some ways he's making an argument about potentially a specific set of science. What I really think we have going on here is there's a lot of different science ideas we all have. And each one of us has our preferences, and we probably need to, there are groups already forming teams. Don gave us an example of Aeolus as one of them. What we want is the program managers to come out here and see not necessarily just one set of ideas, but that this community of people working on in-situ measurements of the atmosphere surface interface is producing a lot of potential mission ideas, and then give a chance for the community to share all of those to the program managers, to educate them, to socialize them to these ideas, so that when any one of our subgroups in our community ends up putting a discovery proposal in, or a planetary, what do they call them, simplex or something like that, these ideas are already percolating out there, and it's not something new and crazy. And there's also a sense that there's a community of people behind it already working on it. So I agree that the sometimes when we talk about these things, we put everything into our mission ideas. And that will probably never fly without a flagship, but it doesn't mean some subset in here can't be exciting enough and sold. And we just need to start advertising more.
Well, but I think the problem is that realistically right now for Mars and generally NASA is very focused on sample return and also anything that's life related. I mean, astrobiology is really huge and only getting bigger. And we already know that that's been the big selling point for Mars missions and is kind of the selling point for a lot of outer planet stuff too. So I think, this is where I think Don's point comes in. There's this realism factor. We have to kind of understand that, yeah, we can tell them that we're really excited about sending these missions, but they're just not excited about what we are wanting to send unless we can really make, that connection clear. And as I put in my comments in the chat, I think the most obvious link between what we've been talking about and trying to appeal to something that NASA is demonstrably cares about is human exploration. And there are other links as well. There are many other links, but I think that's the most obvious one. And kind of the problem is that NASA doesn't really have science and the science missions and the human exploration missions linked up. So they're kind of discussed and planned for on sort of a parallel basis. And I think if they can kind of get that stuff combined, and plus the fact that what we're talking about lends itself so much better to low-cost missions, I think the next decade could be a really good opportunity to get some of this stuff flown, just because it'll be that perfect balance between there's lots of us who are interested, there's lots of opportunity for low-cost missions, and this is something that NASA needs to do because of its, larger scale goals.
Yeah, Claire, I don't think anything I said though directly conflicts with what you said. And the only issue I have at HUMD is I would love to go after them if they ever actually started putting real money into missions. But in the meantime, I think, like you said, the smaller stuff, that's what I was mentioning as well for SMD or opportunities. And I think we haven't discussed connecting stuff this week to things like astrobiology, but habitability, but I think that it can be done.
Well, I know of some major motivations if somebody wants to hear them.
Yeah.
So, both for Aeolian and subsurface wave exchange. So subsurface wave exchange controls the extent of eyes on Mars to a large extent, right? So anybody who is interested to find Mars, mine ice, and so on wants to know where the ice is. And so that's exactly what vapor atmosphere exchange theory does. And in terms of Aeolian process, and then I don't study Aeolian processes, but it seems to me the global planet encircling dust storms are hugely important because for two reasons. It's a hazard to crewed missions. So you want to be able to predict if there is a major dust storm on Mars or not. And it's essential information for crewed missions. And the other is that it creates dust layers in the polar layer deposit. So to interpret the polar layer deposits, you need to understand dust storms. So that to me, the global planet encircling dust storms are to me a topic of Aeolian research with significance far beyond Aeolian research itself.
I wrote a white paper.
Hey, Claire, let's give Jenny a chance. Claire,
Also, go
let's give
ahead.
Jenny a chance to show. Yeah, Jenny was trying to talk earlier.
Oh, that's okay. Sorry. I think what a lot of us settled on this week that I just hadn't even internalized before is the importance of dust. I mean, that's really coming to the forefront. I bet if you asked NASA their top 5 concerns about bringing humans to Mars, in the top 5 would be a dust storm, a global dust storm. So I don't think it's a big stretch and also to understand dust storms, we need everything else that we've talked about this week. We need to understand surface atmosphere interactions of any kind and saltation and everything else that would feed into this understanding of dust transport and dust lifting. And so this is not a big thing for us to try to extend. I mean, I think we're an easy sell.
And I want to echo a little bit of what some of the folks here have said. Serena and I had some conversations with high-level folks at JPL a couple of weeks ago, and this idea of dust being an important kind of hook for alien processes came up multiple times. So I think that this is the universe and other very smart people telling us that that is a really effective hook potentially. I also want to make a comment about the dust. We've got these kind of ideas that we've been discussing. I like the dust storms. Obviously, we need to be thinking about that. There's recent research from Maven that tells us that dust drives water, helps to drive water off the atmosphere, drive water into space for Mars. And so the dust cycle plays a really important role in the climate and the evolution of Mars's atmosphere. Atmospheric retention is a really big question in the field of exoplanets. And any of you have paid attention to the recently selected Venus missions, one of their big selling points was the connection to exoplanets for Venus. And so if we can make a good connection for alien processes to sort of understanding exoplanet atmospheres, I think there's another selling point we could think about. Mars basically is our probe of the outer edge of the habitable zone. And so if we can understand what are the processes on Mars that made it uninhabitable potentially, there's another connection that we can make with exoplanets where questions of where the edges of the habitable zone, that's still a really open area of research. Okay, Claire, I see you're trying to say something.
Oh, I just put it in chat. I basically I've worked on Martian dust storms for like 25 years and the whole time I've thought it's so obvious that this is important, and just to make that one connection that we need to understand how dust gets lifted and where it gets lifted and why in order to predict dust storms, in order to get the climate variability. It's just always seemed like too many connections to be significant. So I think maybe it's starting to change slowly, that there is more awareness of this is interesting and it's important, but it's been a huge effort to even get that slight change. And unfortunately, my experience is it's just not that slam dunk that we think it is, because people have known that dust storms are really important for a really long time. And I'd love to say that, yeah, this is a great thing, we can pin everything on this, but it's just not quite that easy. That's
But Claire, isn't that just a reality that if it's taken that long to get that far with dust being this really important driver and one of the aspects that alien science or alien processes do at Mars, if it's taken that long to get that much people to listen to you, then all the other stuff that's more subtle and not as global impact, it's just a non-starter for them to run a mission on that.
Yeah, I'm afraid so. I mean, there's just, the fact is they have to be very hard-nosed about this stuff, and they have to be like, what do we need to make this thing successful? And that realistically, they're not going to design a mission where it requires a prediction of when a dust storm is going to occur. They're going to design it so that it doesn't, so that it can, say, stay in orbit in case there's a big dust storm, and that it's going to go at a time of year when we've never seen a global storm, that kind of stuff. So I think it can definitely make a mission more efficient if we have a better sense of when storms are going to occur, or we have like early warnings, and it can certainly, like I say, it's an efficiency thing, it's a cost saving thing, it might narrow the envelopes for EDL just slightly, and hopefully we're making a lot more progress in prediction, or having a sense of whether we might get a huge storm in one year versus another. But I think their response to it is more like they want to design around it rather than plunge a ton of money into it. That's kind of my feeling. Well, they want to plunge money into designing things to survive or have mitigation, rather than plunging money into more missions and RNA.
So I have a follow-on comment. I've had some conversations with folks in astrogeology that are chatting with NASA on a regular basis. And, I made a comment about, whether it was dust storm forecasting or near surface ice, and that we need to know these things for human exploration. The response was the focus on human exploration is the moon, not Mars. And, humans on Mars is decades away, and so they're not going to worry about it. So I think it's great to bring up, water is a resource on Mars. It's great to bring up the dust storms, but in terms of human exploration, the reality is human exploration of a planetary body off Earth this decade is the moon.
Yeah, and I think that it was a little confusing because last year, NASA was simultaneously saying we don't have a plan for what we need to know on Mars for human exploration because it's premature. And at the same time, they were saying we need to have the International Mars Ice Mapper to know where the ice is for human exploration. So that was a little confusing. But then the International Mars Ice Mapper was not in the congressional budget. So maybe that reflects that someone went, hey, wait, we don't really need this. So I agree. That's a really good point.
Hey, this is Jake Whitmer at UCLA. I just want to bring up for a second all this toss of dust and everything. Well, it is very important on its own, and there's many different avenues to go down with that. It also can have a huge effect on seasonal activity, and that's a whole nother avenue that you might be able to go down and explore and pitch this as another reason that dust is important. So maybe kind of obvious, but I just wanted to toss that out there.
By the way, I can see questions in chat about what's the science when it comes to dust storms, and it's just weather forecasting. I don't quite understand what those questions are about. I mean, there's science, there's a lot of science in weather forecasting. It's not it's not magic.
Yeah, I also agree with that. I'm not sure what the motivation for those questions are. We've been talking about dust lifting and part sediment transport. It's the main science questions we've been talking about this workshop. So those are all to do with dust storm prediction and all of the weather models. They can be improved. There's lots of elements that are scientific.
There's a strong aspect of chaos potentially in dust storms, but there's also the potential for me to do some longer term prediction or some more certainty because perhaps there's certain waves that need to be present, or it's like setups of the storm tracks or whatever that need to be present on Mars in order for certain storms to develop, or there might need to be dust in a particular location for certain types of storms to develop. So it's not quite as hopeless as perhaps it might have seemed, or it may not be as hopeless as it might have seemed. And data assimilation, which is what's used for Earth weather prediction, is now actually being done on Mars, not in real time, but we are kind of getting there. We probably won't really get there until we've got some more orbital and surface networks. But I think there's a lot of science mixed in with a lot of technology advancements and more technical side stuff that's in terms of these models and ensembles and weather forecasts that can make progress in tandem there.
So I think it's valuable to always look ahead, even though we think we know what NASA's goals are, even in the next decade. All it takes is one administration change, and suddenly we're going to Mars again with people. And can I remind everyone, there is a human spaceflight, humans on Mars experiment on Mars 2020 on a landed spacecraft already. So if you make a good enough case, then you get there early. And I think the next thing someone should put on a Mars lander is something to look carefully at the dust, because this is a mission-stopping question. And so we need to be sure to remind them this is a mission-stopping question. So please put us on the next one.
I mean, I have to say, what I said, there's been some small changes. I've noticed there's more interest in like doing stories about dust recently, and dust storms and dust lifting. And there's also, as she said, there's like, I think some pieces of astronaut suit material to see how that is affected by dust impacts, but there's an abrasion. But there's also, I think the big difference with Mars 2020 compared to previous missions is we do have a lot of really nice dust sensors, as I was talking about on Tuesday. So I think that is a sign of progress. But at the same time, those sensors are flown under the STMD, the technical side. It's not considered like part of the science mission. It's more the technology side of the mission. So it's almost grudgingly put on there, but nevertheless it's on there. And that's, you know, that's basically the human exploration side of things that was pushing for that. So I know Don was saying, you know, they're not putting, or someone was saying they're not putting money into it, but there is actually some, you know, some push to get those dust sensors onto that mission.
I'd like to repeat my written comment that I think we all ought to do more to try to inspire and intrigue the public. Using good graphic artists to really help illustrate stuff that our technical graphics aren't clearly indicating to the general public. Maybe even cute little short story movies and sci-fis and stuff. Work with there's a huge community out there pumping out realistic science fiction animations and stuff. And maybe we ought to try to finagle some collaborations with them.
Totally agree.
And then the other thing I would say is, in the meantime, while we're trying to get a Aeolian dedicated mission or fancy, expensive, super cool new instruments, I think we ought to try to be getting the tiny little sensors, the pressure transducers and temperature sensors, and anything that can be tiny and data frugal and power frugal. If we can squeeze those on to existing missions with other priorities, at least we start to fill some gaps that, for example, I was blown away that we didn't have any meteorology kit on MER. And you know, that some of this stuff is easy to add and would contribute, and we can keep sort of, it's incremental, but we should hit this from every angle that I guess seems useful. Thank you.
Can I echo what Don has said here? I don't know if you all can read what he's saying. This is kind of what and I'm sorry, I hope my comments are not coming across as overly negative. I don't really mean them to be. But I want to get at these kinds of things that Don is saying here. I think it is very important to understand how dust storms work and to be able to predict dust storms. But in terms of selling a mission, we've got to connect them to these other kinds of questions. It's not enough to just say, we're going to be able to assimilate data and make weather predictions on Mars. So that may be important for human exploration someday, but I don't know. It doesn't strike me as a hugely important science question to be able to predict weather. Maybe it is, but it seems like it hasn't made a dent. And I think Don's points here are things like how does climate work? What is setting the timescales for the polar layer deposits? Like, how do we even interpret those? We can't interpret those without knowing how dust storms work. Connections to habitability, connections to atmospheric retention and volatile retention. I think those are big picture questions. Bring it beyond Mars. Yeah, we got to make connections to other planets. Exactly. A lot of the conversation that we've had here has really been fascinating, but it's very focused on, sometimes it becomes very focused on like calibrating models and tuning models. And it's not enough to say, no, we need to send a mission to Mars to figure out the threshold, the wind speed for dust lifting. We're not going to get a mission to do that, right? NASA's not going to give us $100 million to send a mission to Mars just to figure out what the wind speed is that lifts dust. That's not a science question, right? That's like that's a tuning question. So I think we need to recast those questions of calibrating models into being things like, how does the dust operate on Mars? Mars is a dust planet, right? If you know anything about Mars, you know that it has these enormous dust storms. That's like, you can pull someone off the street and ask them about Mars. That's probably one of the first things they'll say. It's a place where there's a lot of dust. So clearly there's a strong hook there, and we just have to make that strong science connection.
So Brian, I feel like this discussion's evolved into trying to argue a specific set of science goals and objectives for a potential mission, which I don't think is what we wanted. What was the intent of this discussion? Because there's probably a number of people listening online who have their whole different thing and they're confident it'll work and they can sell it. And hey, that's awesome. They need to submit a simplex or discovery. And there's some other group who's exactly on this and they should submit theirs too. But the general question is, how do we continue to communicate that there are different potential big picture science questions? Because I think there are. And I don't know where the weather thing came from, but I don't think that's not what I hear most of the time when people bring up what the science they want to sell. So I don't want to get distracted by that. the question is, a lot of this was driven by Serena originally, and what Tim has been doing for long term is, having these meetings, having these discussions, but what do we do next? And to try to, hopefully, Serena, this is what you'll want, to connect it to what we already are talking about doing next, to communicate to the community, to the program managers, for example, is that we have this special issue coming out where we were hoping that everybody online is thinking about some papers to submit to the Planetary Science Journal for a special issue on optimizing in situ measurements. Well, I think the title of the special issue is a little more generic, so I'll let Serena correct that in a second. But we want to get some papers submitted in the fall so that we can go through review and get them out next year. And that is a way of showing that there's a robust community doing research that are discussing the kind of big picture science questions that we may or may not think are appropriate for missions. But let's let the community overall argue that, and not just on a single topic. But the question is, where can they argue it? So a special issue is one option, but I think we need to think about how to have maybe one-day meetings that are attached to larger meetings like LPSC, AGU, ICAR, other type of stuff, to get that out, and also how to do some of what people are talking about, images. How do we talk about our science on Twitter and other media spaces where we can communicate and share it, and let's see if other people agree with us that this is cool. Like, let's not just assume, yeah, there's a long history of people being, I'm not into it, but the community is bigger, larger, and different now with a different mix of people involved. Let's find out what they think right now.
Can I just this this is going to sound like a terrible time to advertise something, but I think it bears with what Alejandro was just saying, that we noticed a few years ago there wasn't an AGU session that actually had the word aeolian in it, and there were sessions where they were looking at surface atmosphere interactions, but it just seemed crazy that there wasn't an aeolian session. And I do see this at a lot of meetings, that there are not aeolian sessions. So I'll just put in the chat, we've run this aeolian session at AGU that some of you have attended already for a couple of years now, and we're doing it again this year. So anyway, I'll put the link to that in the chat. And I just think that, as Alejandro was saying, more sessions in meetings, more one-day workshops or whatever attached to meetings, just to kind of get it much more on people's radar. All of this sort of stuff, not just aeolian, obviously, but surface atmosphere interactions, volatiles, the importance of this stuff to understanding ice and polar layer deposits, and all of that stuff. I think it can just help raise the visibility. And to echo what Steve was saying earlier, I 100% think that we will really reap the rewards if we can somehow get a bit of funding to make better graphics and visuals of what we think these missions ought to look like, and what we think a good MET package would look like, and how it should be accommodated. Because sadly, they have stuff, when people put together a mission concept study, or they put together a talk, or they put together anything, they go online or they go to some previous study and they grab whatever they can find, and they just will keep putting the same old pictures of poorly accommodated and unsophisticated sensors into it. These things keep getting recycled because there's nothing better for people to use. And I really think, as someone said earlier, a picture says 1,000 words. Just putting a little bit of money into getting some good graphics is gonna reap much more rewards than one would think.
It doesn't even always have to include money. I'll bet that there are superb digital artists amongst many of your undergraduate students who would be delighted to see their little copyright undergrad student down at the bottom of a graphic or something. So I'll bet that all of us have access to more graphic skills than we might initially think.
Yeah, no, that's such a good point.
Yeah, that's great. And maybe if we could think about some artwork for our special issue of Planetary Science Journal, there might be a way to use some funding we already have to do something like that. Okay, let's see. Yeah, I think we're about to wrap it up. Any last thoughts? Of course, we'll have some more time tomorrow morning to kind of think through action items and specific takeaways. But anything else? Oh, thanks, Claire. Thanks for your link. Oh yeah, Tim has something in the room here.
So I'm not only speaking for myself, but all the other discussion leads. Please email your discussion lead your notes tonight. So we actually have time to try to assemble them into something coherent before we're supposed to present them in the morning. So if you can get that emailed to us, I will go ahead and put my email in the chat, but it's also ttitus@usgs.gov. I suspect some of the other chairs will want to do the same.
And Cynthia, you look like you put yourself up. Did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, nothing else to add. I have saved the chat, so I can forward that on. I think it'll be very useful. I really appreciate everyone joining in, and lots of great comments, both online and in the room.
Okay, and this is it for today, right, Serena? We don't have anything else. Oh, we have, sorry, I have one more thing. Sorry, one more thing. But thanks, everybody.
Oh, that's right, your pictures. That's right. Sorry, Janie, we keep sliding you. Okay. All right. Actually, let's see if we can pull Janie's pictures up on this computer. Janie, if you want to work on that while she's doing that. One more thing, and I know we're past the end time. What I had on here was to check in with folks. Tomorrow is our summary day. We're just going to hear summaries, and then we're going to talk next steps. Is there anything that we were missing that we organizers and chairs should go off and think about before we put out the summary products and discuss next steps tomorrow? Okay, if anyone thinks of something, please email soon so we have time to act on it. But I just want to do a check-in with folks and make sure there's not something of like, oh, we're totally going to be missing this information tomorrow. Okay, the other thing I'm going to throw out there, and I'm not going to hold people for this, I would like to start getting feedback about the format of this meeting. So if you have thoughts on that, please share them with me over email. That would be really helpful while it's fresh in people's minds, especially today with the small groups and the large groups. We did that a few different ways. We had the virtual and the in-person separate. Some of them, we had the small group and then we had some break of some sort. And then we had the large group versus discussion 5. We smashed them together. Like, you can think about that. Some of them, we didn't have small groups. What worked, what didn't? I'm very interested in your feedback on that, not just for us in terms of possibly running something like this again in the future, but also more broadly. We are presenting a lessons learned on hybrid meetings to NASA. That's part of our promised product for them giving us money. And I think this will be a really useful thing for the community. So I know everyone's tired, so I won't make you tell me that feedback now, but while it's still fresh, try to write it down, jot it down, and then send it over to me. All right, Janie, did you? Okay. All right, so the last thing, Janie's going to show us some of her Kite Cam photos and talk about it. No, thank you so much, Janie. They're super cool. Earpiece, or do you want the handheld? Okay.
Thank you. Great. Okay, so I've been making these just little Google Photos pages. We can send it around. Anybody can look at any of these or use them as you want. So got some pictures of the equipment, and then Ralph Lorenz helped me get a little kite camera a number of years ago. It's just a basic, pretty small kite. You can roll it up and stick it in your backpack very easily, and it's just a GoPro on a piece of Tupperware. And then it hangs from the kite string. And it works pretty well because we just do time lapse, which means that all you have to do is count on getting, we do time lapse at once every 5 seconds. And so you just have to count on getting 3 or 4 out of 100 pictures that are good. And it usually ends up being even better than that. So, oops. So here is one of the pictures kind of from down low. Yeah, and you always get those pictures of yourself as you're putting them up. And a couple of them from a little higher up of all the equipment. You can see some nice dunes in the background too. Little shadows of the kite. And of course they come in lots of different, I like keeping some of these, they're just funny. Okay. And then a few of us hiked up the dune. There were some really nice ripple textures up there too, by the way. And some really pretty overlapping wavelengths of ripples that I thought were really nice. Sorry, field trip person kicking in here. Then the other thing that was happening way up there is some movement of sand up on the top. So here's a little zoom in video. Look at that, nice. We couldn't remember the name of this feature, but where the dust is and sand are streaming up off of the dune. That's pretty neat. And here's a different close up. So the wind was really ripping up there. That's pretty cool. So because of that, we decided to put the kite up again and got some pretty nice pictures from up overhead. So this is the crest line. You can see all the footprints on. And one thing that I learned about wind over dunes by trying to operate this kite is, okay, you can operate the kite as long as it doesn't cross over that crest line, because then once it does, it will drop to the ground and you got to hike up and over the dune to get it back. So I tried to loft it, but not let it crawl too far past that crest line, but got a ways up, and you can see the slip face of the big dune right here and the other side, and the lake over here on the right. And then this last one, I think in the upper right corner, you can zoom in on where we all were, which is this area up there, and the lake right there too. So it's pretty neat. It's a good tool to be able to bring with you. And as I said before, I like to bring both a kite and a drone if we can use a drone wherever we are, because of course, if there's no wind, the kite doesn't work. And there were a number of times I put it up and it wasn't working. So, but then if it's too windy, then you can't fly the drone. So it's good to have both. All right, that's it. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Janie. And we'll reconvene tomorrow at 8:30. Thanks all.